If you enjoy our content and think this is important material, the best compliment you can pay is by sharing this with your friends and family. This helps us out a lot. Also, if you enjoyed today's program, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to this podcast. We would love to hear from you. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, today we have Sonia interviewing John about textual criticism. This is the field of study through which we can know the original text of the New Testament. We are continuing from the previous episode today.
So he picked, I think, 3 snapshots or so, 2 or 3 snapshots out of all of these, and he used, I think, about 5 out of all those manuscripts, and said, oh, look at the differences here in these 9th century manuscripts to the 5th century, and then look at the differences here in the 12th century. And on this basis, he's arguing that, as we said, that the Byzantine text underwent a long process of development and standardization due to deliberate editing. Well, how would his work show that? And why would you pick only those few out of your data points? If you've got 140 data points, why not use them all?
Maybe only 5 were favorable to his theory, perhaps?
Possibly, or possibly textual critics don't understand how to do scientific data handling. What I did is I took all of the manuscripts, all of the data that he provided, and I calculated for each century the average percent agreement with the majority text by century, and I plotted it.
So you looked at every variant in all 140?
Well, I didn't have to look at all the variants. He already did that part of the work. He took the majority text as we have it now, and he calculated the percent agreement based on the variants, how close they come to the majority text. If his thesis is correct, the further back you go, the more different it should be from the majority text now. And as you move forward through time, it should be coming closer and closer and closer. If you graph the percent agreement with the majority text by century, you should see a line that has a slope going upwards through the centuries. We didn't do that, though. As I say, he used only a very few data points. And I did use all of them. And I did plot them through the centuries. And you know what you found? It was essentially flatlined. It was essentially a flat line going from the mid-4th century through to the 16th century. The percent agreement with the majority text in the 16th century was about the same as in the 5th century. So there was no change. It was not something that developed through the years. It did not go through this long process of development and standardization at all. I mean, you can see it. It's simple mathematical analysis. You can see the graphs in the articles on my website. There was no such study. The evidence does not support that claim. Well, so textual critics who read my article, they got desperate, I think. One of them claimed it's invalid because Wachtel's data set wasn't properly picked at random. He focused on the particularly interesting Byzantine manuscripts, the ones that had the maximum deviation.
Doesn't that make it look worse for him if he cherry-picked only a few?
Well, that would be a problem. That would be my first question. Why is Wachtel's work so enthusiastically embraced? Then when I use all of his data to show that it's wrong, they attack me for using the data that Wachtel himself put together. They say, oh, he didn't stratify it properly. He cherry-picked. Well, if that's an argument against my analysis, it should throw out his work from the very beginning. Why is that a problem? If he has not stratified the data, and that's a problem for my analysis, why is it not a problem for Wachtel's analysis? There's very much a double standard here. Secondly, this fellow doesn't seem to understand how statistical analysis actually works. If Wachtel actually picked the interesting ones, the ones that deviate most, then you would expect what effect? What effect will it have? It will change the percent agreement with the majority text. It will lower it.
Yeah, if he only picks out all the, I suppose by the most interesting ones, they'd be the ones that have the most deviations.
Yes, that is what it is. And so it would lower the overall agreement. And I was wondering when I looked at this that the agreement seemed lower than I thought it should be, and this is why. But he did this consistently through all the centuries. So what that means is while it will affect the percent agreement, it won't change the trend. Okay? If he had picked the stratified properly and so like say 90% agreement, 92% agreement, maybe we had 95% agreement, 98% agreement. But it would still be flat line through from the 5th century through to the 16th.
Okay, because as time goes on, they don't increase in deviation.
Yeah, the thing, yeah, he picked the interesting ones equally throughout all the centuries. So the way this throws off the data applies equally in each century. And that's why you'll get a lower agreement in every century, but the pattern, the straight line, will continue. And it will hold. So in fact, what I have shown is that Wachtel's new model, this desperate attempt to get past the problems since all of the underpinnings of the Westcott-Hort theory have fallen apart, and now they've parachuted in Wachtel, it doesn't work. It continues to fail to show that the Byzantine text is secondary and that it came about by intentional editing. So let's do very quickly a summary to this point. The original building blocks of New Testament textual criticism was to divide the manuscripts into text types, and the goal there again was to turn all of these 5,000 plus Byzantine manuscripts into just one archetype. Well, we've seen that that's wrong. It's false. The next building block was that the Byzantine text is secondary because it was created by late recension, probably by Lucian of Antioch, and we've seen that that's false as well. Griesbach's canons, this was crucial. We've seen that those are wrong. All of the studies done on actual scribal habits show the opposite of what Griesbach said. The linchpin of text critical theory, the one thing without which the whole edifice collapses, is the idea that scribes freely altered the text intentionally as they copied it. And we've seen, both from the studies and from the discussions of inscriptional curses among the church fathers, this is absolutely false. It was an assumption made up and used to describe the Bible. It was never proven, and why so many textual critics, evangelical textual critics, just went along with it without asking questions is something I still cannot understand to this day. So where do we go from here? All of these scholars who are saying we need some kind of new model and they try to go to Wachtel's model, which, as I've shown, is a failure. What do we do? What is the significance, the outcome of the things we have seen? Well, first, the significance of what Alain noted is we no longer have three text types to deal with and decide which is the best text type. Since the concept is now no longer sustainable, what we have is about 5,800 manuscripts, each of which counts as an independent witness to the original New Testament. If you could find genetic relationships among them, as you can in a very few cases, then you could say, no, this one copied that one, so it's not an independent witness. But we find very, very, very few of those among the 5,800. If this particular manuscript, even if it comes from the 13th century, we know it at the beginning of the chain was the original. We went through many stages, but we don't have any of those stages. What we have is the original. So it's a witness to the original. Second significant thing is, as we've seen that the studies showed, that scribes very rarely made intentional changes. And if they did, they got in trouble. The vast majority of scribal errors were accidental. Accidental omission was the most common, but other accidental mistakes. And if they're accidental, what does that mean? They're random. They're not intentional, they're random. Well, you got a combination then of a large stratified database and random event variance means that we can and must apply statistical analysis to the issue. And this is beyond the skill set of the artsy textual critics. They're not trained in this, and they think they don't need it, but they do. We have to do it. There have been a couple of attempts done. Wilbur Pickering had one in one of his books, but it was not done well because he was still working with text types instead of individual manuscripts, and specifically the individual variants.
Well, John, we're very fortunate then that you are trained as an engineer, aren't we?
Well, it's true that if you have different sort of training, the non-traditional training, you might bring things to the table that the ones who are traditionally trained will not know about. But so here's the thing. We need to do statistical analysis. And again, unlike Westcott and Hort and Griesbach, we don't just pull things off the top of our head. That's not the way engineers work. We need actual real-life numbers. So the first question we have to know is if errors are random, how often do they happen? What number should we use when we do our calculations?
Isn't it going to depend on the scribe? Some are more careless than others.
Exactly. So if we want our conclusions to be valid, we want to bend over to give every advantage to the other side and make our scribes really, really messy and see what happens then. Because if we pick numbers that make them very, very careless, and it still turns out that we've got the majority text as the correct one, then by this method we know that by a fortiori that this method will yield the original text. So we want real numbers. Let's pick a really, really careless manuscript, a manuscript where the scribe was really, really careless. Perhaps the most careless one that we have is P66.
More careless is that Sinaiticus or Vaticanus?
It's actually more careless even than Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Yes, P66. It's not a complete copy of the Gospel according to John. It's about 800 verses. And in the 800 verses, it has 882 errors. 482 of them are singular errors, which means we don't find them in any other manuscripts. And 40% of them are absolute nonsense readings. Like, there's not even a question, could this be the original reading? Because it just doesn't make sense.
This is like a typo, basically.
Yeah, something like a typo. Now that will give you about one error for every 17 words. This is extremely sloppy manuscript. But hey, we're going to give every opportunity to the other side. So let's go with one error every 10 words. Okay? A level of carelessness that you don't find any real-life manuscript remotely approaching. Okay, so let's go with one error for every 10 words. Now, let's suppose, you take the original, let's suppose only 5 copies of the original were made. Only 5 copies. Well, if only 5 copies were made of the original, for an error, okay, a variant, a wrong reading, to infect the majority of manuscripts, you would have to get into at least 3 of those 5, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and that would just be a bare majority, 60%. To get to an 80% dominance, you need in 4 out of 5.
Thank you, everyone, for listening today. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but please join us for the next part tomorrow. Same time and same place. Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. We would love to hear from you. Please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, MeWe, and YouTube. Simply search Truth in My Days as one word. Again, Truth in My Days as one word, no spaces in between. And you can connect with us. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.